Now, before we start writing code to scrape a web page, we need to understand a little bit about the structure of a web page. Now, the reason the structure is important is because we'll use the site's structure to write code that then gets us the data that we want to scrape. So understanding that structure is an important first step for any web scraping project. Now, when we visit a web page, our web browser makes a request to a web server, and this request is called a GET request, since we're getting files from the server. The server then sends back files that tell our browser how to render the page for us, and these files will typically include HTML files, which makes up the main content of the page. We then have CSS files, which are used to add styling to make the page look nicer. And then we could have, say, JavaScript files, which add interactivity to web pages. You'll then have other assets such as images, which would be JPEG and PNG files, which then allow the web pages to show pictures. After our browser receives all the necessary files, it will then render the page and display it to us. So there's a lot that happens behind the scenes to render a page nicely, but luckily for us, we don't need to worry about most of it when we're scraping a web page. When we perform web scraping, we're mainly interested in the main content of the web page, so we look primarily within the HTML files. So let's look at HTML in more detail. Now, there are web developer courses out there that would teach you all you need to know about HTML. However, I'm going to try to cover the basics of HTML in this video. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language and is the language that web pages are created in. So HTML isn't a programming language like Python, it's a markup language, and that tells a browser how to display content. Now, if you're already familiar with HTML, feel free to jump to the next video where we'll start looking at the requests library. Otherwise, let's dive in a little further. Now, HTML consists of elements which are known as tags. Now, the most basic tag in HTML is the HTML tag, and this tag tells the web browser that everything inside of it is HTML. So we can make a simple HTML document just by using this tag. So let me show you how we can make an HTML document using this tag. If I open up a blank notepad, I can start an HTML tag by putting a left-angled bracket, then HTML, then a right-angled bracket, and to end the tag, I can simply put a left-angled bracket, then a /, then the word HTML, then a right-angled bracket. Now, because we haven't added any content, i.e. we haven't added anything inside of this tag, if we viewed our HTML document in a web browser, we wouldn't see anything. So let's add some more stuff to our HTML file. Inside the HTML tag, we can put two other tags. We'll start with the head tag, and the head tag in HTML is used to define the head portion of the document, which contains information related to the document, such as the title of the document, metadata, and so on. So we can put a left-angled bracket, put head, then a right-angled bracket. We can then close our tag by using the same syntax as our HTML close tag, and what you should pick up on here is that the head tag is opened and closed within the HTML tag. Now we can also add a body tag, and the main content of the web page goes into this body tag. So we can copy and paste the head tags and place them underneath, but we can simply change the word head for body. So once again, the main content of the web page will go inside the body tag, whereas the head tag contains data about the page. So it could include things like the title and other information that generally isn't useful in web scraping. Now, so far we've just added tags, but we still haven't added any content to our page. To do this, we need to start adding stuff to our body tag. So if we were to open this HTML file at this point, we still won't see any content. So let's now add some content to this page, and we're going to put this content inside a p tag. Now, a p tag defines a paragraph, and any text inside the tag is shown as a separate paragraph. So inside the body tag, if I open up a p tag, I can then put "Welcome to the Python Bootcamp." and then I can close the paragraph tag. Once again using the same syntax we saw when closing other tags. I can then add another p tag underneath to incorporate another paragraph, and this paragraph will simply contain the text, "I hope you are enjoying the course so far." I can then close the paragraph tag, and if I now save this notepad, so if I go File, Save As, and save this file as html_example.html, so saving it down as an HTML file, when I now go to the folder location where I've saved this file and open it up, you will then be able to see how this file is rendered in the browser. And it's not very interesting, we simply have two sentences stored within two paragraph tags. Welcome to the Python Bootcamp, and I hope you are enjoying the course so far. But the idea of adding content inside the body tag is a key thing to take away from this. Now you'll notice here that I'm using indentation depending on the tag that I'm using. And the reason I'm doing this is firstly to make it easier to read, but tags also have commonly used names that depend on their position in relation to other tags. And indentation can actually help visualize this. So we have what are known as child tags, and a child is a tag inside of another tag. So the two p tags that we've included in this file are both children of the body tag because they are inside of the body tag. Now a parent tag is the tag another tag is inside. So in this example, the HTML tag is the parent of the body tag because the body tag is inside of the HTML tag. We then have siblings, and a sibling is a tag that is nested inside the same parent as another tag. So in this example, we have the head tag and the body tag nested inside of the HTML tag, but the head and body are siblings since they're both inside HTML. The two p tags would also be considered as siblings since they're both inside the body. Now HTML also provides us the ability to utilize properties that changes the behavior of the file. So let me show you a simple example. Let's add a link to Google using an a tag with a respective href property. So just under where I've typed "Welcome to the Python Bootcamp," and before we close the first paragraph tag, I'm going to open up an a tag, and inside this a tag I'm going to put the text "Google everything." Now in order to have this link send us to a specific web page, I can add a property to the a tag which is known as href, and I can set href equal to https://www.google.com. So href here is a property of the a tag, and it will allow a user to click on a link and be navigated to a different web page. So the href property of the tag determines where the link goes. If I save this file and then open up the HTML file again, you can see we now have a link that states Google everything, and when I click on this link, we open up google.com. So A and P tags are extremely common tags in HTML. There are other common HTML tags that you'll run into. One is the div tag, which can be thought of as a container or a division or an area of the page. The B tag bolds any text inside of it. The I tag will italicize any text inside. We have table tags, form tags, but I'm not going to go into every single HTML tag. Feel free to do this in your own time, or if you are interested in web development, be sure to search for a web development course that goes through this in a lot more detail. But before we move on to the actual web scraping of a website, I just quickly want to cover the class and ID properties that can be associated with tags. Now these special properties give HTML elements names, and we can then utilize these names to make it easier to interact with the HTML when we're scraping. Now in terms of rules, one element on a web page, for example a paragraph, can have multiple classes associated with it, i.e. can have multiple names associated with it. And a class can be shared between elements, i.e. one class name can be used for 5 different paragraph tags. But each element can only have one ID, and an ID can only be used once on a page, so it gives us a more granular naming convention. Classes and IDs are optional, you don't need to incorporate these into the HTML document to make your web page work, and you'll find that not all elements in HTML have a class or an ID, but we can add classes and IDs to an HTML file as follows. So let's say we wanted to name our first paragraph. Well, in the opening P tag, we can put a space after the P, then put the word class, and we can set this equal to main-header in double quotes. So we've now called this paragraph main-header, and if I ever now stipulate the class main-header, it would be in reference to this specific paragraph. If I wanted to give this link a specific ID within the class main-header, I could then give the A tag a second property, so after google.com I could put ID equals google-link in double quotes. And we've now provided this specific A tag an ID called google-link. Now I can do the same for the second paragraph. So if I were to put a space then the word class and set this equal to main-content, I'm now able to reference the class main-content in order to bring back this specific paragraph's content. Now if I were to save this and reopen the HTML document, you can see that by adding these two classes and the ID, it doesn't actually change how the tags are rendered in the browser. But you'll soon see how useful they are in specifically identifying parts of a web page. So if I were to open up the National Weather Service website again and then go to Developer Tools, this may make more sense if you were unfamiliar with tags prior to this video. So you can see here we have an HTML tag, and if I scroll to the bottom, the HTML tag is closed. Inside of this HTML tag, we have a head tag, which is then closed, and we have a body tag, which is then closed, both inside the HTML tag. If I open up the body tag, this is where the content sits, and you can see here that we've got different div tags, each with a class name, some have an ID name, and when I drill down to that specific summary text that we saw earlier, you can see that this text is sitting within a P tag, which stands for paragraph. So hopefully you can now see how the structure of a web page makes it easier for us to be able to then start scraping the relevant content that we're after. In the next video, we're going to dive into the requests library, which will enable us to make a connection to a website in order to start scraping the information that we desire. So I'll see you in the next video.